Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and I'll shift over so you can see I've officially gotten a wallpaper permanent. I always usually have a different one for each episode, but I'm getting kind of tired of getting a new wallpaper for each episode. So I've got a couple of nukes, Weeping Prophet in ancient Old Testament Hebrew, an Adam across, and a microphone for those who are just listening. Completely irrelevant to today's conversation, which we're going to shift into now. Exciting. We're going to get into military mental health, both veteran and active duty. Uh, Talking about one of my favorite subjects, actually, just speaking of Hebrew, is the verse of the day the other day was, "Do not let them look down on you for your youth, because it is I who go with you," right? The fact that God doesn't care about age, we've seen that throughout the Bible, not just with the youth, but on the opposite end, you're never too old to do anything. And today we have a gentleman who, while advanced in years, took on a task, a mission, a journey that not many people would do while still young, let alone in their 70s. So I'm excited to talk to him and hopefully inspire all of y'all that wherever you are at your life, whether young or old, if you have a big journey you want to go on, it's never too early or late, as long as you have the proper mindset. And we're going to talk with our guest today about, other than mindset, what else do we need to accomplish these big tasks in our life? But Mr. Rand Timmerman, I've rambled on, so I'd love to pass it over to you to share a little bit about yourself before we get into today's conversation.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this opportunity. Yeah, my brother Ron, was 71, decided to hike the Appalachian Trail because the love of his life, Edie, had died, and she had a stroke, and then a bunch of mini strokes, and so he took care of her for 6 years.
Wow.
And we're both Vietnam veterans. My brother was in the Army, I was in the Marine Corps. Both saw quite a bit of combat, came back, so there's a fair amount of trauma from that. And but my brother, when he came back, my mother's best friend was Edie, who was 14 years older than my brother, divorced with 7 kids. And the next thing I knew, he's running around in a convertible with her. She's wearing a mini skirt, red cowboy boots, and they're going line dancing.
Wow.
And he fell madly in love. And they had a great life. She was in the Mormon faith. They went to Utah and lived out there with 7 kids, ended up with 27 grandchildren and 27 great grandchildren.
That's a lot. That's
That's a lot.
plenty.
And when she passed, he was just devastated. And I reached out to him because I knew how close they were. I had never even been to his house in 40 years in Utah, but I went out to see him and we went
Wow.
hiking in the desert. And he told me, I'm going to walk the Appalachian Trail. Now I had done luckily we were both pretty good shape. He did a lot of hiking in the West in Utah, and I did a lot of hiking over the years with my kids and things like that. And I ran a bunch of marathons, and I drank too much at times. I used alcohol to mask some of my PTSD from the Vietnam War. We didn't even know what it was at that, back in those days.
Right.
But so here we end up, these two really old guys going on a hike from Springer Mountain, Georgia to Katahdin Mountain in Maine through 13 states, 2,190 miles, 600 mountains, 465,000 feet in elevation changes. And when we started out, it was snowing. I thought it was the craziest idea that we could ever possibly had. I ended up writing a book about it, and I took 5,000 pictures. There's 500 pictures in the book. But what I did originally was because I wanted to have something for our family to have.
Right.
About about 3 million people hike on some part of the Appalachian Trail every year, but only about somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 actually try to hike it the whole length, right?
Right.
Of that, about 17%, which is about 450 people, actually do it. It is
Mm.
extremely difficult. I had an artificial knee from a bad motorcycle accident. So my one leg was half-inch lip. I like to brag that I limped. I'm the limpiest man that ever walked the Appalachian Trail.
That's the title to have for sure. I gotta say that's it is inspiring though. It was funny because I'm in Georgia right now and it's not snowing. Although as soon as you walk outside, you will be drenched because it is just so humid and so unbearably hot right now. So what was the reasoning behind starting in the winter time? Was it to kind of start difficult and get easier as it went along, or was that just the way it lined up?
No, that's a really good question. It's 2,190 miles in the mountains. So for me, for example, at that age, I was hiking 5 or 6 miles a day or walking or whatever. There's It's totally different world.
Yeah,
And have you ever been to Fontana Dam in Georgia? It's right at
I
the
have not. I will add it to the list now to reference back to this episode.
Yeah. So the first 80 miles or so go from Springer Mountain, which is in the northern part of Georgia, to Fontana Dam, and then you work your way up into the Tennessee, uh, and then eventually Tennessee uh, and the North Carolina border, and you get up into the Smoky Mountains and so on and
Yeah.
so forth. So, you got 3,000 people. Most of them are going to go north from Springer Mountain because they can leave earlier. If they go from Catadin Mountain, they're going to have to wait until June or July. It's going to take you 5 or 6 months. Even the good, the hardy people, it's a long haul. We averaged about 11 miles a day, which is freaky.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot. And I actually wrote in the book, my brother didn't know it, but I wrote in the book that I figured 2 weeks max. Brother, when he got the book, he goes, What? You didn't think we could do it? No, I didn't think we could do it. Oh my God, I was in so much pain. Freezing at night, your shoes be frozen, put them on in the morning, go.
Right. So how long did it take y'all to complete again?
It took us about altogether about eight months. We did we left March 22nd in 2018. I was 72, Ron 71. We figured we were going to go the whole distance that year, but we didn't make it the whole way. We went, I think he's told me 1,400 and some miles. And we were in New York actually. And um, I don't know, we came out when it was one of those days of 100 degrees. We both lost like 35 pounds. So we've gone from 185 down to 155. I mean, I'm high school weight.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the fatigue factor, and I came out one day and he was waiting for me and he looks at me, he says, "You want to go home?" I said, "Sure." So we went home, but then we ended up going back the next year. And I ended up falling down a rock slide in Massachusetts and really banging myself up really bad. I couldn't even walk, so we went off for about a month. I thought we were done at that point, and then Ron said, "Well, you want to try to finish it?" I said, "Sure." We went back. I didn't know the 300 miles, but I had done real damage. So when he
Mhm.
finished it with his brother or with his son, Rick hiked the first 2 weeks with us in 2018, and then he did the last end of it up to Catadin Mountain with Ron. Uh, and I was in the hospital getting a new hip, so I couldn't do it. But I only did 1,865 miles. So
You say that nonchalantly, but that's more than most people. Like you said, the statistics of how many people have done that. So that's amazing. And so the way I take it, and correct me if I'm wrong, so y'all had a tent and snack bags packed for this 8 month journey, right? You were just setting up camp whenever you were done doing your miles for the day. Is that kind of how it worked, or?
no, no, actually, so I asked my brother when I was there in January before we went on the hike. I said, "So how are you going to do this?" He said, "Well, I'm going to ride the bus down to Springer Mountain and start walking." And like I said, I had done a fair amount of hiking in the Smoky Mountains and stuff. I'm like, that's crazy. There's just no way. So what we ended up doing, we drove two vehicles down. I had my vehicle and he had his. If you look at the maps this is what we did on the Appalachian Trail. There's roads. A lot of them are very bad roads, dirt roads, and so on. They cross the Appalachian Trail every 10 to 15 miles.
Okay.
So what we did was we started at Springer Mountain. He drove up to the next road. I don't remember how far it was, probably 12 miles, something like that. And then he would hike south, I would hike north, and then he would get my truck and come back up to where his car was on the Appalachian Trail, and then we would just stay right there. And then the next morning, most of the time, he would drive north to the next road, get to where it crossed the Appalachian Trail. I would go north, he would go south, and that's how we did it. There's sections like in what's called the Priest in Virginia. There's a section there, and then in the Smoky Mountains, there's two sections, 35 miles. We had to carry a full pack. Most of the time, I was carrying a pack about 20 pounds. I would carry 24 ounces of bottles of water, and I had a first aid kit and some other things because a lot of the hikers were not well prepared, and people would get
Yeah.
dehydrated. First aid kits, there's a lot of snakes, bears. I saw coyotes in a pack at one point, went right by me, running like hell, and I couldn't figure out what was that all about. And then I saw the bear. I
Right.
don't know who was after whom, but
Yeah.
there was a lot of exciting things that happened. I could tell you story after story, and they're all in the book. And then I'm a recovered alcoholic, so in the book, I talk about my recovery program. That's why it's entitled A Spiritual Passage. My brother was a bishop in the Mormon church, very religious man his whole life. I was I hate to say it, Antichrist. I came out of
Mm.
Vietnam, uh, bitter, kind of a bitter man. I lost a lot of buddies and banged up pretty good. My brother was pretty well banged up too. And then there's the whole mental, emotional aspect of it. I used
Yeah.
alcohol to medicate my brother, maintained a pretty good relationship with his higher power. So at 68 years old, I was a complete wreck. I was no longer a functioning human being. Alcohol, you talked about your dad losing the weight, all that kind of stuff, and that other thing I listened to, and you had it right. You got it right. And I looked in the mirror one day and I thought, I'm gone. I'm done. I'm not a man anymore. What the hell am I?
Wow.
I'm just a piece of crap. I mean, it was, and I gave up. I got involved in a program and I did the deal and made a connection with a higher power. I was on my way to the liquor store. I'm on a 10-day airback vacation. I'm talking about my last strong. And that's what I would do. I would start thinking about things and I would decide to drink again, even though I'd promised myself I didn't want to drink. I was so bad at the end. I did not want to drink because I knew what was going to happen. I had been on suicide
Mm.
watch, hospitals, and all that kind of stuff. And so one day at the end of it, I decided I was going to get a gallon and just finish the job. Cherry vodka was my deal. And the problem was it was Saturday morning. And like I said, I'm doing this for 10 days. So I'm a total wreck. And I start walking to the liquor store and it's 7 o'clock in the morning. Well, there's a problem. Liquor store doesn't open until 9. So I went and sat on this house on front step, just sat down. And the guy walked out with a fishing pole. Turned out his name was Billy Cook. He became we call him sponsors.
Right.
Came out and looked at me. He was kind of scared at first. And he's like, he could have called the police and said, arrest this guy, get him off my property. But he didn't. He came over and looked at me. He says, oh, I know you. You're just like me. And he sat down next to me. Turned out he'd been a sober man for 30 years. And he came into the same program that I went into and helped a lot of men. He took me to the hospital and spent the whole day with me there. Got me 4 days later and took me to a meeting. And I looked at him. I said, do whatever you tell me to do. And what do you know what the first thing he told me to do after that meeting? He said, pray to that God you don't believe in. See, I had told him my story. I had told him I had never told anybody before in my whole life about the
Okay.
war, things like that. And you were in the Navy. I'm sure you had some tough things. And so he knew what my predilection, he knew I was mad at God on my best day. Worst day, I didn't even think there was one, right?
Yeah.
And so after that first meeting, he looks at me and he goes, you need to pray to God. And I'm starting to object. And he says, or you will get drunk again. And I started crying. I'm 68 years old. and I can't stop drinking, and he's killing me. And I looked at him and said, I'll do whatever you tell me to do. He told me to start praying. And a lot more to the story, but it worked. I've been sober 11 years now. And I work a couple hours a day, at least every day, working the program and helping other men are trying to, change my life. So, that was in 2014. And then 4 years later, there's my brother. He needs me. And I was there. I was ready, more or less.
Yeah.
So we went on
So
this bike. Yeah.
yeah, I want to go from limping in the mountains to humping the boonies, and that's to say, let's go back to the Vietnam era. Did you enlist or were you drafted, and what did you do while there, and how did that kind of play out?
Uh, I went to college when I got out of high school in 1964, but I didn't have any money and I didn't know what I wanted to do. Went to a small state college called Oswego in upstate New York, and vicious winters there. And I'm going to
Yeah.
college, and I was I was working as a janitor from midnight to 8 every morning, and I was working as a pin setter in a bowling alley because I didn't have automatic pin setters yet.
Mm,
And, uh, and my life sucks. And the only thing I like to do is drink, and I had a girlfriend that liked to drink, but I could never drink because I never had any money. So one night
yeah.
I got drunk, and when I came to on the pool table the next morning, the owner of the bar came back in. I stayed there all night. Apparently, I passed out on the pool table. And he came in, turned the radio on. They were talking about First Marines going into Vietnam. And I sat up on that pool table and looked at him, and he looked at me, and I jumped down. I said, I'm gone. And I went and enlisted in the Marine Corps. And within a couple of days, a month later, I'm at the War Memorial in Syracuse, New York, raising my hand saying that I will defend my country against enemies, foreign and domestic. And 9 months later, I'm in a rice paddy going, oh crap.
What did I just sign
I
up for?
think I made a big mistake.
Yeah. So I want to go back. I know this is completely irrelevant, but I am a little bit younger than you, so I had to ask. After each person bowled, you and once they had their second turn, you would go and manually set up all the pins in that lane.
Yes, yeah. It was so the way it worked was it's between each two lanes, there was a place where you could sit and it was cut out. So, and then the
Yeah.
machines so what would happen is like this guy's over here bowling, he hits the pins, they fall, right?
Hmm.
When the thing retracts, you jump in, you pick the pins up, and you put them in the rack. And when you've got it full, you pull a lever and it comes back down. And then in the meantime, the guy on the other side, the next lane over, they've thrown their ball. So a lot of times you go from one to the other.
Right, right.
But it was a really crappy job. It hurt a lot because the pins don't always go straight, so they would hit you. And on Friday nights, they would throw a ball. You would jump in to get the pins, and they're drunk, and they'd start throwing other balls. So you'd be in there picking up.
You went from bowling to dodgeball. Yeah, that's so interesting to me. I never, because some stuff I just take for granted. That I'm like, oh, they must have always had this. So at least I thought you were manually placing each of the pins. I said that's tedious, mind-numbing work, but still gathering all of them and doing all of that. That's interesting. But you left that, you went to Vietnam, and so were you in the boonies, right in the jungle? What was your position as far as like leadership or following, and how long were you in Vietnam for?
I was in Vietnam for 13 months. I was with the First Marines in the First Marine Division. We were in what's called I Corps, which was the most northern province of Vietnam. First Marines were west of Da Nang. We were in the mountains, jungle, um, all kinds of bad critters, including the enemy. I almost got killed by a crate snake one night, very deadly poisonous snake.
Mm,
I went as far north as Khe Sanh, which is right on the DMV. At one point, we were over by Laos and we captured some Chinese. soldiers. A lot of people don't know we were fighting Chinese sometimes. It was, I mean, it was the Wild West. It was total Wild West.
Yeah.
I was a machine gunner at the time. I went to ambushes. I joined a reaction platoon. I was on a C-130 that crashed with only one engine. Survived that, and I don't know. The stories just go on and on. But
Yeah.
uh, one of the worst ones, I was a machine gunner on a helicopter. One of the first times we went out, we went into a hot zone, and we were getting fired at. Pilot wouldn't land. I didn't understand that. I ran in and took in the ammo and water and brought out wounded Marines and loaded the helicopter. And then we took off. Well, that's pretty hard to do, when it's not on the ground. So
Yeah.
I'm complaining to the pilot on the headset, on the machine gun, why he didn't land. And when we got back to the base, he gets the map out. He's walking towards me because he's a captain, and I think I was a Lance Corporal, E3 at that time. And I wrote about this in the book. And he said, "You want to know why I didn't land?" And I said, "No." And he says, "Look at this. You see what that is? Where we were? It was a minefield."
Wow.
Yeah.
So that means you were out running around the minefield.
Yeah. I'm running through the minefield, taking water and ammo and bringing guys back and loading them on the helicopter. So after that, every time he didn't land, you knew why. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I've had a couple different Vietnam veterans on the show. Some of my favorite people to talk to. Sometimes I have a hard time believing it almost. Some of the things that y'all went through and experienced. It doesn't seem real. And a lot of them talked about helicopters not landing, not because of the minefields, but in their case, they had to clear trees and literally make a hole for the helicopter to even get a ladder in, let alone land. And trying to shoot up flares and cut down trees while under fire, fighting the enemy. So a completely different world than what we live in now and how warfare is now. So like you said, you've got that story. And then are most of your stories in your book as well from Vietnam, or is that kind of just briefly touched upon?
I touched on the ones that related to what was going on a particular day, or when I was talking about my recovery, and my drinking and some of the, trauma that I dealt with. I had really bad nightmares when I came back for a long, long time. I mean, bad, bad. It would just drive you nuts. And reliving horrors, in the war.
Yeah.
Um, at one point, we ran out of ammo. I used a bayonet, and so I would have a nightmare where I'd be in a battle, and then I would get stabbed with a bayonet and die. You know,
Mm,
that kind of thing. And in those days, when we came back, there was no PTSD hadn't been invented yet. There was no treatment. Guys would go on leave, and right after I came back, guys would be like a sergeant. He'd have all his stripes and medals, a war hero, really tough guys. They go on leave for 30 days. They go to the ocean, they get booze, and they get in a motel room and they just drink their brains out for 35 days. And then they would come back and the Marine Corps would court martial them. And the next thing you know, these guys they're PFC.
yeah.
What the heck?
Sad reality, for
It was
sure.
reality, yeah. And that happened I had good friends that drank themselves to death or committed suicide. And I lived with that too. But no, I didn't write about all my stories. And I'm actually probably going to do another book about some of the stuff that happened. But so when I met a bunch of guys when we were up by Clingman Stone in the Smoky Mountains, I spent a couple nights with a bunch of helicopter pilots from the Army. There was a bunch of them. They were hiking for a long weekend, and I kind of hooked up with them. So that's when we started talking about, Vietnam and me being a machine gunner and all that.
Right.
So I told them that story, and they were like, "Oh yeah, that's crazy." It was that kind of war veteran type things that you talk about. Those guys have been in Iran or Iraq or whatever.
Mm,
Afghanistan,
yeah.
not
So
Iran.
what I want to focus on is kind of, obviously there's a lot that happened during your time in Vietnam afterward. And of course, you had your whole journey through the mountains. So I want to tie all three together, which is what really affected you the most from Vietnam. You mentioned the nightmares and then kind of coping with the alcohol to deal with the emotions. What kind of emotions were you feeling? Was it survivor's guilt? Was it imposter syndrome? Was it regret? Was it just emotional detachment from the rest of the world? Did you feel like you kind of didn't fit in anywhere? What was going through your mind for what sounds like a couple decades after Vietnam?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, so I was also they commissioned me, they called them Mustang lieutenants.
Okay.
In World War II, they called them combat lieutenants. So the last couple of months, they made me a lieutenant because lieutenants didn't last long sometimes. And so I did that the
Mm.
last couple of months. And when I came back, they said, you can go back to being a corporal. And actually, I got promoted to sergeant during that time. But I was doing the lieutenant's job. So, or you can go to OCS. So I ended up going to OCS and got commissioned. And then I became a forward observer, but I ended up being a JAG officer. And I really liked doing that. So when I got out, I went to college and got my BA, and then I got my law degree and I became an attorney. So that's why in my book it says, Rand Timmerman Esquire.
Yeah, for those of us who aren't military, because I recognize the JAG term. For those of us who aren't military, for civilian listeners, what is a JAG?
A judge, advocate general.
Yeah.
You're acting as a lawyer. When I went to the training for that, there was 100 of us. 99 of them were captains who had just gotten out of law school and done the OCS and the basic school. And I'm a second lieutenant, and I don't have a college education.
Mm.
So I probably found out 50 years later, I was probably the last enlisted man to become a commissioned officer without a college education, and maybe the only JAG officer ever. I mean, it was a fluke. And the funny part was that when we got there, these guys are all, they want to party every night. And of course, me too, right? But I decided not to during the week, and I studied my brains out. And I ended up being the honor man of the platoon. And it
Hmm.
all really ticked them off. But the thing was that I realized I can do this. I got a
Right.
knack, right? First two guys, I was a defense counsel. One of them was for sleeping on watch, which in the Marine Corps is like you're going to, you're going to the brig.
Yeah.
And I came up with a hokey dokey alibi for him, and he got off. So I did a couple more, and I got another guy off. Now these are not the jurors are officers, right? Majors, lieutenants,
Mm.
or lieutenant colonels, or whatever. So they made me a prosecutor. So I spent the rest of my career in the Marine Corps being a prosecutor.
And
Um,
this was you had left Vietnam or you're doing this in Vietnam?
no, no, no. I only did one tour in Vietnam. I never went back.
Okay.
I had a guardian. I didn't know it at the time, but I had a guardian. I had a gunnery sergeant who became he was a Mustang lieutenant and a captain, and he's the one that got me into JAG school. And then but I had also become a forward observer, so I was probably going to go back, right? And he knew if I went back, I probably wouldn't make it. So every time I was supposed to go back, he'd send me down to Puerto Rico, and
Huh.
we had a contingent down there, and I would do the Article 32 trials for a month, and I'd come back. And so finally, I said, "Well, how come I haven't gone to Vietnam again?" He said, "What do you think I'm sending you down there for?" Roosevelt Rose was the name of the base in Puerto Rico. So he saved me.
Wow.
I didn't go back. I got married, had my first child, but yeah, the nightmares were bad. I was a really hard worker. I was a devoted father. I mean, I really took that stuff seriously. But I knew that alcohol was going to be a problem someday. I knew it the first time I drank at 13. I knew. I got totally wasted with another kid who was 200 pounds. I was 100. We crawled home. I laid on the bed, this room is spinning, and I looked up and I realized if I rotated my eyes at the same rate the room was spinning, I didn't get sick and I didn't wake up with a headache. I didn't feel great, but
There's a piece of advice for everyone.
Yeah, well, I made a conscious vow. This is probably going to be a problem because I just liked
Yeah.
it so much. It made me feel like $100, $1 million. I felt like I was 6'5". Like I felt like I was Clint Eastwood, man. I got it. And
Yeah, I
here I
get
am,
that.
yeah, I'm a skinny, 5'8", whatever. And so I made a vow I would never do drugs, not even pot, and I never did. But I knew alcohol was going to get me at some point. And with between the nightmares, I had got all kinds of excuses. But deep down inside, today we know that alcoholics metabolize alcohol differently. It's a physiological fact. Our bodies cannot process acetone. So what happens is when we drink, we get thirstier and thirstier. That's that feeling that acetone gives us, right? It's a complicated chemical reaction, but that's what alcoholics are have a disease. It's recognized by the American Medical Association. I think that happened in 1955, something like that. And I see it every day. And some guys just never, gals, women too, of course. It's horrible. You talked about your dad. I feel for him. I wish I could help him.
Yeah, me too. And it's not just in I believe the statistics are 1 in 7 people minimum know someone who is addicted to alcohol or drugs, So it's and I've yet to meet someone who doesn't know someone who's dealing with that. It's a huge issue. And the alcohol was only one part of everything going on in your life. You mentioned earlier in the episode kind of how you got done with the alcohol abuse and 11 years of sobriety, but with the alcohol disappearing from your life, what then became the medium through which you dealt with the nightmares, the other emotions from Vietnam in your life? You talked about the reform in the use of alcohol, but what about the rest of your life? What then became that substitute to help heal?
My higher power through my recovery program. Um, I had a horrible relapse history between the time I was 65 and 68, and I could manage I would go to some meetings and things like that, and using my tremendous willpower, I could go 95 days without a drink, and then I would just decide, I would get upset, have a bad dream, what it didn't matter really, right? Broken shoelace. I would decide, I would unadmit that I was powerless over alcohol, and I said, I'm going to just get drunk again like I used to. I'll be all right like I used to. And then 4 or 5 days later, I remember the first time this happened to me. I'm in the hospital. How did, to this day, I don't know how I got there. I have no idea.
Mm.
And there's an old lady sitting by the window reading a paperback book. And hours are going by. I'm trying to figure, I don't feel good. I'm trying to figure out what the hell happened. And another lady comes in with a book and they chit chat for a minute. And she sits down by the window and the other one leaves. And a few more hours go by. And, nurses coming in, checking my vitals and stuff like that. And finally I go, why are you here? And I'll never forget this. And she goes, oh, honey, I'm here to keep you company. My brain goes, you're on suicide watch. You're on suicide watch, Rand. What the? And then I go, well, this is an aberration. This will never happen again. Oh, yeah, it did. And then I ended up in the VA. I got a ride in handcuffs to the VA in Syracuse and locked up on the sixth floor I don't know, at that point I was like 67 years old in handcuffs, go
It's
through
awful.
doors to get in. It's real easy to go through those three doors to get in. It's really hard to get back out,
Yeah.
you
Yeah, for
know.
sure.
And 3 or 4 days later, I realized I'm just a drunk. I'm sober now, more or less, and I'm in my right mind. These people are crazy. I was in there with a captain that had been a company commander in Vietnam, and he and I walked the hallways for hours just talking to each other because we could relate. You know,
Yeah, and that's really needed.
he didn't make it. He couldn't let it go. So to answer your question, my remedy was to when I got sober, through the blessedness of a higher power, beginning to realize I had to have some help from a higher power. It can be whatever you want. It can be sober drunks in a room. It can be Jesus Christ. It can be a mountain. It can be whatever you want to make it. If you learn that you are powerless over alcohol and you can't manage your own life, then you need a higher power to help you. And that's what I turned my life, my will over to a higher power that doesn't want me to be drunk, that he wants me to be sober. So that's what I did. And the nightmares went away. My whole life, it's been a joy. I was working with another guy here a while ago. I work with guys all the time. Because if I'm helping another alcoholic, and especially if most of the time they're a lot younger than me, right? A lot of them have been in and out, relapse histories, and they relate to me because I had that for a while, 3.5 years before I got sober. And one of them said to me one day, he said, Rand, because now I'm 80 years old, and I still hike every day, 7, 8 miles. And, I'm a
Nice.
pretty active guy. And he said, if you could change anything, would you go back like to your 50s and do
Mm.
something different? And I said, no, you wouldn't? And I said, absolutely not, because I wouldn't know what I know now.
Mm.
I had all those experiences. The first guy that asked me to help him after meeting, I had done what we call the 12 steps. I had more or less done the
Right.
program. I have a connection with a higher power. I don't want to drink anymore. The obsession's been lifted from me. Thank God. That took about 6 months. And a young guy asked me to help if I would help him. And my brain was screaming, Rand, you're not ready, right? Because I've only been sober for like a year. So I went and talked to Billy, who's, my mentor, if you will, and he goes, I thought sure he's going to say, you're not ready. And but he didn't. He goes, hey, mister, that's great. Go for it. Billy, you're supposed to tell me I'm not ready. He goes, oh, you're ready. You got a lot of bad experience. A lot of
Right.
bad experience. And now you got a whole year of good experience. And now I've got 11 years. And Billy had 30. And he died with 35 years of sobriety. And I was there he had an awful time at the end. He didn't drink or anything like that, but he had to have a leg cut off, and it was a horrible. He was in the ICU for 4 months. I went and saw him every day. A lot of times he wouldn't even know I was there. See,
Wow.
I wanted to be there
Yeah.
with him.
Yeah. So you've shared a couple different parts of your life, the Vietnam era, the recovery and the suffering post-Vietnam, the alcoholism, and then the recovery from that in the transition to your sober life. And we know nowadays you're an author. You mentioned your book earlier. Who should really read your book and what can they get out of it? You mentioned 500 photos, a spiritual passage, a journey full of advice, probably humor, and then also some dark stories. Who should read this and really look into it?
I think anybody who wants to hike the Appalachian Trail, and there's a lot of hikers out there. It's in a journal format, so it does in the book, every other chapter we talk about where we hiked from and to each day, how many miles it was, mountains we went over. We tell a lot of funny stories, funny things that happened in there. There's a lot of humor. I had an encounter with a bear that was amazing. I talk about that. There's a lot of pictures of critters in there. I sat on a rock one day at the top of a mountain watching the raptors. I'm just in heaven, It's so beautiful. And another hiker walks up to me and she goes, Rand, because we knew each other. She was a lawyer too, actually. I hiked with her
Mm.
for a couple of days. And she goes, Rand, do you know there's a copperhead under that rock you're sitting on? And I
Oh
go,
man.
yeah, there is. That was kind of tricky. How do you? It was cold. It was pretty cool that morning, so I don't think it was hyperactive or anything. I think it was pretty subdued because I stood up carefully and walked away and looked. I took a picture of it. It's in the book, and there are a lot of beautiful pictures in there. A lot of beautiful scenery on the trail. It was an amazing experience. It was incredibly hard. I've never been so fatigued in my whole life. The title on the front of it, it says "One Step at a Time." And there's a picture of the book. I have a website, Rand Timmerman. It's just my name run together.com. It's very simple. And you can get it from Amazon, thrift books and whatever. But I think the other people, I have a lot of friends that are not doing well. There's something about old age. Some people are like me that are just kind of like hyper active all the time. I've never had to sleep more than 4 or 5 hours a night, and I've had a lot of, I had a lot of great accomplishments. And but a lot of people at the end, I have a neighbor. My God, it's so sad. Just sit in the rocking chair. They're not exercising their heart. Anybody who is struggling with any kind of difficulties, whether it be addiction, depression, just don't like the way your life is going, you will be. I've had a lot of people have read it that said that it was very inspiring to them to think about how they're living their lives and what they might be able to do. Because if you can do one step at a time, and there were a lot of days at the end, particularly, I fell down every day. I broke 4 poles. I mean, I took some pretty
Right.
nap. Yeah. Uh, but I always remind myself, nobody's shooting at you, Rand. What the hell's your problem?
Mm.
Get up, move, right? So I'm hoping, and it seems to be the case, that people who read the book find it very inspiring. And like you said, we all know people who are depressed, old age, they don't like their life. They see the end of the road and it's kind of short and they don't like it. And really they can do a lot more than they think they can. I didn't think we could hike the trail. I'm not saying everybody's going to read the book, is going to go out and hike the Appalachian Trail. No, that's not what
Right.
it's about. It's being motivated to think, give yourself credit that you can do more than you think you can. You don't have to sit at home on the couch watching stale movies and just thinking about dying, right? Or if you're a young person, maybe you're going through a divorce. I've been married 4 times. Alcohol, and character defects. You do stupid things when you're drunk, and I did a lot of
Oh
stupid things.
yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't know how well I'm answering your question, but I think it's a fairly broad veterans. There's a lot of veteran stories in there. Some of them are funny. Um, there are a lot of veterans that were out there hiking. Funny story. So my trail name was Rand Bow. My brother,
That's good. I do like that.
yeah. So my brother named me that. His was attitude indicator. So he became a commercial pilot. An attitude indicator is a instrument on an airplane panel that tells you what attitude the airplane is in, right? Is it flat or is it twisted or whatever?
Right.
So uh, and we were almost into New Hampshire. We were well up there. And by now, there's nobody around. I'm pretty much hiking all day long by myself. And my brother, because he's going south, he's only running into 2, 3, 4 people. I mean, and, but this one day, I ran into 3 or 4 people and I go, my name's Rambo. What's your trail name? Because I wrote them down, put them in the book, right? And they go,
Right.
oh yeah, we met your brother. Can we have your picture? And they're putting their arms around me, and the women are kind of like, what the heck? And it just had a kind of a weird vibe. This happened like 3 times that day. So that night we're sitting, I'm sitting by my tent, getting ready to go to bed and stuff like that. And I go, bro, something really weird's happening today. And I explained it to him. And he doesn't say anything. He's kind of looking down. I go, what's going on, Ron? What's going on? Oh, nothing. I said, come on. He said, well, I told him your trail name and I told him that you were the real Rambo, the one that they made the movie about. I said, you're gonna get me killed. These guys are all way bigger than me. They go, well, I took out Rambo. That was kind of,
Right.
yeah, it
No,
was,
that's good. That's probably trail names. I like that idea. I even hiking the trail for a while, and I'm sure a lot of the Vietnam books I've read, everyone had their Vietnam nicknames, and when I was in the military, a lot of us had our military nicknames, and it's a good way to raise morale, and hopefully there's usually a good story behind it, or it's a good play on words, and yeah. What I wanted to say was what you reminded me of, and we have a saying in the Navy called "take a hit and keep going."
mhm.
I'm sure it's military wide, and you've kind of showed that you're the embodiment of that today. I especially thought about that when you talked about the hike through the Appalachian, hip injuries, limping, broken poles. Like there was a lot of setbacks. Sounds like pretty much every day or every week, and so you still pushed through that And not just then, but throughout your life, you've already shared a lot of setbacks spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and physically. And here you are guesting on podcasts, writing books, and sober. So I think that in itself is inspiring. But yeah, for everyone who wants to get deeper into that inspiration, we're going to have your book and website in a description below for them to check out. And like you said, if it's not for them, it can definitely be for someone they know. As we've both discussed, we know a lot of people going through a lot of times. And we've talked before on the show, if anything else, y'all, I'd like to encourage everyone listening to go on a nature walk or a hike sometime soon if you can. It's does a lot more for you than you would realize. It's what we could call a spiritual passage. But Mr. Timmerman, I'd like to thank you for coming on the show today and sharing everything that you have. And definitely want to have you back on if you ever make that second book. Definitely let me know, and we can reconvene and see if you've taken more photos and hiked more trails for sure.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Whiskey. Appreciate it. Semper Fi.
Sailing through the ocean blue, nuclear reactors my crew, guiding the ship, the stars as our guide, through the waves we ride. Jokes and laughter fill the air, on this voyage we have to share, working together, side by side, as one family we will abide. In the heart of the ship we reside, nuclear operators with pride, powering the vessel with every stride. Our mission, a source of great pride.